Welcome back to our studios here in Lahore. I'm Hamza Amjad, and let's start with Damascus, which says it will reject any agreement between Turkey and the US to establish a security zone in northern Syria. Now, state media says any such deal would constitute an attack on the sovereignty and unity of the country. Meanwhile, the UN says airstrikes on civil infrastructure by Syrian government forces and their allies have killed 103 civilians in the past 10 days.
At least 10 different locations, 8 in Idlib and 2 in rural Aleppo, have experienced civilian casualties as a result of airstrikes in the past 10 days alone, causing a minimum of 103 civilian deaths, including at least 26 children.
The UN says more than 400,000 people have been displaced in northwestern Syria over the past 3 months. Moving on to Afghanistan now, where the Taliban have captured Garan wa Manjan district in Afghanistan's eastern Badakhshan province. The district police chief, Abdul Wali, said government forces did not send reinforcements despite repeated calls for 2 days. The district, known for its large semi-precious gem deposits, fell to the Taliban after 4 days of heavy fighting. The district police chief, along with 40 soldiers, fled to the Nuristan province, while dozens of others surrendered. Garan wa Manjan district shares borders with Nuristan, Panjshir and Taqa provinces. In a telephone conversation, the US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and President Ashraf Ghani have agreed to accelerate efforts to end the war in Afghanistan. US Secretary of State Pompeo has assured the Afghan president that the United States is committed to a conditions-based troop withdrawal. Joint Chiefs of Staff Chairman Joseph Dunford and Special Envoy Zalmay Khalilzad are in Kabul to discuss the forces' withdrawal. Violence has recently flared in Kabul, with 2 explosions jolting the capital city. While the UN Security Council is meeting today to discuss the security situation in Afghanistan. This comes after Afghanistan's President Ashraf Ghani and US Secretary of State agreed to speed up peace talks. Kabul was rocked by 3 bombings yesterday, in which 11 people were killed. The upsurge comes days before the start of campaigning for scheduled presidential elections in September. While Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan says the US decision to expel Turkey from the F-35 program would not deter it from acquiring warplanes from elsewhere. Last week, Washington dropped Ankara from the program, saying its acquisition of Russia's S-400 air defense system undermines NATO security. The US has warned Turkey not to make the Russian system operational. In an interview, US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said that Turkey could face more sanctions if the missile system was activated. This comes after the Turkish military announced it had taken delivery of the second shipment of equipment from Moscow. And Turkish government forces have killed 8 Kurdish militants in southeast Hakkari province that borders with Iraq. Now, the Foreign Ministry said the militants were targeted by Turkish jets in an air-backed operation over the rural areas of the Yuksakova district. Ankara alleged that those killed in the raid were part of the PKK, which Turkey identifies as a terrorist organization. It said the ongoing military raid is a part of domestic security operations. While North Korea says its latest missile launch was a warning to South Korean warmongers to stop joint military drills with the US. Chairman Kim Jong-un said Pyongyang will not stop developing powerful weapons to guard itself. Kim also warned Seoul against importing weapons from the US. And the US-South Korea Joint Military Command said the missile launch has no effect on their defense posture. US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said the launches are part of Pyongyang's negotiation tactics. He said working-level talks with North Korea could start within a few weeks. Moving on to the US, which has claimed Iran test-fired an Al-Shahab-3 missile 1,000 kilometers from southern Tehran. The reported launch comes in the wake of strained relations between Tehran and the West. The Pentagon says the missile's range is part of Tehran's efforts to improve its range and accuracy. It says the missile does not pose a threat to shipping or US bases. Meanwhile, US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says he will visit Iran for talks if necessary in order to resolve tensions. Iran has neither confirmed nor denied the testing of its Al-Shahab missile. Palestine has suspended all agreements signed with Israel. President Mahmoud Abbas says Palestine will not bow to Israeli dictatorship and its use of force. This comes after Israel demolished a number of Palestinian houses in occupied East Jerusalem, a move that prompted international criticism. At a Palestine Liberation Organization meeting in the West Bank, Abbas said the move is a response to Israel's violation of signed agreements. He called on the international community to take a stand on Israeli violations in the Palestinian territories. Abbas said it is time to implement the reconciliation deal between Hamas and Fatah brokered by Egypt. The United States has imposed sanctions on 10 Venezuelan nationals, including President Nicolas Maduro's stepsons. The Treasury Department has levied restrictions on transactions by Maduro and his business partners, accusing them of corruption in food imports. Washington accused the Maduros of embezzling hundreds of millions of dollars from food import contracts amid widespread hunger in Venezuela. In recent months, the U.S. has escalated sanctions against Venezuela, which is struggling with the political and economic crisis. Venezuela's government has denied any wrongdoing, saying that American accusations are part of an economic war to bring down Maduro. Well, representatives from China, India, Russia and South Africa have arrived in Brazil's Rio de Janeiro for a ministerial meeting of the BRICS group. The talks will focus on countering unilateral sanctions imposed by the U.S. The meeting of member states' foreign ministers is a prelude to the BRICS summit in November. China and Brazil have confirmed bilateral interactions on the sidelines of the meeting. Well, top European officials have rejected Boris Johnson's Brexit policy, calling it unacceptable after his first speech to the UK Parliament. More details in this report.
The new Prime Minister said he was committed to getting rid of the Irish border backstop, which has been a bone of contention in negotiations. EU's chief Brexit negotiator, Michel Barnier, called Johnson's intentions contrary to the mandate of the EU. Johnson also spoke on the phone with former EU Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker. Juncker restated the EU position that the already negotiated withdrawal agreement is the best one possible. Juncker said the Commission will be available over the coming weeks if the UK wanted to hold talks. Meanwhile, Germany's Foreign Affairs Committee head Norbert Röttgen said that EU will not be bullied into compromising its principles. But France says it is ready to work with the UK on a post-Brexit relationship. Britain has until the end of October to conclude a withdrawal deal.
And the European Central Bank has warned of inflation in the Eurozone due to trade conflicts and doubts over a no-deal Brexit.
European Central Bank Chief Mario Draghi also pointed to other major risks, including geopolitical tensions. Draghi says the outlook is getting worse for countries where manufacturing is very important.
And the reasons were basically found to be in the general uncertainty that's now been with us for several months, actually more than a year, and which relates, as I said many times, to trade wars, to geopolitical tensions, to now also the possibility of a hard Brexit. Certainly is another factor to take into account.
The central banker says monetary policy can only work up to a point, and governments must step in if the situation worsens.
In the United States, the federal government will resume capital punishment after a 16-year gap. The 5 death row inmates are convicted of murdering and, in some cases, torturing and raping children and the elderly. This comes after US President Trump called for tougher penalties on violent crimes. No federal prisoner has been put to death in the US since 2003. The government has about 60 inmates on death row. However, methods of execution and a controversy over lethal injections is still being debated across the country. And the Pentagon has arrested 16 US Marines on alleged human smuggling charges. Investigators say information from prior human smuggling probes helped in the arrests. Local media says the arrested Marines opposed President Donald Trump's border reinforcement force and anti-immigration policies. Pakistan's ambassador to the UN, Maliha Lodhi, has been unanimously elected vice president of the Economic and Social Council. Ambassador Lodhi will assume the Asia-Pacific seat in the ECOSOC Bureau. Lodhi says her election as the vice president of the ECOSOC is a vote of confidence from the global community. She said ECOSOC is at the heart of implementation of the 2030 Agenda for achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Lodhi also said that Pakistan has always engaged efficiently with economic and social development activities at the UN. 4 people have been killed in Pakistan after heavy monsoon rains brought havoc to the capital Islamabad and nearby areas. The city district government has issued flash flood warnings and emergency alerts for low-lying areas. A storm near the capital, Islamabad, produced 160 millimeters of rain over the last 24 hours. Rescue officials say a mother and her son drowned in flood waters, while 2 men have been swept away in flash floods. Meanwhile, in India, incessant rain, flooding and lightning has killed over 450 this month. The overall death toll across South Asia has risen to over 660. While the International Organization for Migration says 150 people are missing and feared dead after a wooden boat carrying migrants capsized off the Libyan coast. The head of the UN's refugee agency, Filippo Grandi, says this is the worst such tragedy in the Mediterranean this year. The Libyan Navy says more than 300 people were on board, mainly from African and Arab countries. It says 137 passengers have been rescued. Libya has become a major conduit for African migrants and refugees seeking a better life in Europe. Earlier this week, the Libyan Coast Guard intercepted 70 migrants off the coast, escaping the country. Over in London, a heat wave has swept over, giving it the second hottest day on record. The hot spell originating from the Mediterranean raised temperatures to 37.7 degrees Celsius in London and its surrounding areas. More in this report.
Local weather forecasts say the country's heat wave should last for about 3 months until October. It was a new July temperature record for the entire United Kingdom. Many commuters had to travel on sweltering tube lines not equipped with air conditioning.
In this country, I haven't experienced it this hot. The tube was very hot. I think there's no air conditioning on there, and it wasn't so crowded. I was lucky today, but it was very hot. I have air conditioning in my bedroom. Yes, I'm lucky to have it.
The authorities say the underground rail lines won't get air conditioning until 2030. Londoners have been using air conditioners, fans and freezers to help them endure the heat. Locals and tourists struggle to cope with intense heat in southern Spain. In Belgium, the weather authority issued its first ever code red warning as the country experiences the hottest temperatures on record.
We have different sensors within the rails, and with these temperatures it can be that these sensors will malfunction. If that happens, we have a problem, of course, because these sensors, they will give our personnel a notice where a certain train is at a certain moment. If you don't know that, you can't have trains running safely.
Météo France says an afternoon temperature of 40.6 degrees Celsius has been recorded in Paris.
And with that, we're going to take a short break, but don't go anywhere. I'll be back with more stories. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Now, the European Commission's president-elect says the bloc plans to launch a special fund to wean members off of using fossil fuels. Ursula von der Leyen revealed the plan during her visit to Poland. Take a look.
Leyen said the EU will create the Just Transition Fund because new technologies being adopted in the region require investment. Meanwhile, the EU has also asked the bloc's top court to take action against Spain and Bulgaria over poor air quality. According to the European Environment Agency, nitrogen dioxide causes about 9,000 premature deaths every year in Spain.
We need to care for our earth we live off, and that we want a healthy and clean planet. And therefore, we have to step up with climate change, which means a lot of innovation and clean technology.
With the UK scheduled to leave the EU by October 31st, Leyen said she will launch consultations on the bloc's future after she takes office.
Well, an international doctors consortium says Congo's Ebola outbreak is worsening because of a lack of awareness and health facilities. The UN's World Health Organization declared a global health emergency following the outbreak in the country. The International Medical Action Alliance said a majority of victims are dying at home without medical care. They said patients are reluctant to go for clinical trials for fear of dying in isolation away from their families. Congo's health ministry says victims' families are contracting the disease at an alarming rate. Over 1,700 people have been killed by Ebola in the DRC this year so far. China has successfully launched its first commercial rocket capable of carrying satellites into orbit. The rocket Hyperbola 1 carried 2 satellites into the pre-selected orbit from a facility in the Gobi Desert. The 20-meter-long rocket has a maximum diameter of 1.4 meters with a liftoff weight of 31 tons. It reached an altitude of 300 kilometers in orbit. The Hyperbola rocket is designed by private lunar exploration startup iSpace. And while ecotourism is booming around the world, a Dutch company is offering innovative cruises along Amsterdam's famous canals. Participants aim to fish as much plastic waste as possible during a 2-hour boat tour.
I want nets in my face.
Equipped with fishing rods and thick gloves, a group of people peer into the water from one of the many boats lining Amsterdam's famous canals. But it's not fish they are hunting on their cruise along one of the Dutch capital's most famous tourist attractions. It's plastic.
You find a waste bin and it's already full. People put their stuff just underneath the waste bin, for instance, and one person starts and the other does it also. So before you know, there's a lot of waste on the streets. And then it begins to rain, or the wind begins to blow, and it rains or blows into the canals.
The canal cruises run by the Dutch group Plastic Whale are reeling in big business. In 2018, they drew 12,000 visitors, and this year the company expects more.
Obviously, you're on the beautiful canals of Amsterdam in a really nice boat, but at the same time you're active as well, and you add something positive to the canals and to the city because you're making it cleaner.
Last year, the thousands of amateur fishermen and women on Plastic Whale's boats collected 46,000 plastic bottles. They fished out a bizarre range of objects, including shoes, bleached out soda cans, wine bottles, and even nappies.
Really enjoyed it, but also it's really eye-opening just how much rubbish there is in all the canals. So.
Plastic in sea, rivers and other waterways is a problem around the globe, causing harm to marine ecosystems. Amsterdam is increasingly a victim of its own success, with its canals and architecture attracting 18 million visitors last year.
A German charity, Skate Aid, is trying to bring life back to the war-torn Syrian city of Qudsaya by teaching children to skate. To help, the organization built a skate park in the city a month ago. Now, children are hoping to become professional skaters. Let's take a look.
NGO founder Titus Dittmann believes skateboarding can teach children traumatized by years of conflict and violence to stand up to falling. Skate Aid has built several skate parks in war-torn countries, including Iraq and Afghanistan, and Syrian children are overjoyed to have one in their locality.
Yeah, we used to sit on it. We did not know how to stand up on it because we never experienced this before.
The park provides skateboards and other much-needed equipment to children.
kids here. They're so nice. They learn so fast, and they're super kind. Just like giving me gifts and wanting to skateboard. It's amazing. Yeah.
With skateboarding making its Olympic debut in Tokyo in 2020, children of war have a chance to fulfill their dreams.
Well, an all-woman biker gang in Russia is planning a 2,000-kilometer journey to the Black Sea. The group's leader, a 55-year-old motorcycle enthusiast, is challenging stereotypes about both age and gender. More in this report.
Sebastiania Samorodok is the retired head of a folk music ensemble and is in her 50s, but she isn't ready to settle down just yet. She spends her free time burning rubber around the Russian countryside with her gang of women bikers. They call themselves the Steel Cobras.
My friends kept asking me, why do you drive alone the whole time, Siava? You should start a women's motor club. I said, I don't know, I will try. And so our club will turn 5 years old this year.
The group's lineup has changed frequently over the years. Only 2 original members, including group leader Sebastiania Samorodok, remain. Later this year, they plan on riding 2,000 kilometers through the Urals to the Black Sea.
I had never even considered riding a motorbike, so I started from zero, like everyone else. My neighbor bought his son a motorbike, and I liked it, so I decided to get my license. It worked out, and this is my second motorbike now.
The Steel Cobra's leather-clad leader says she still feels like an 18-year-old. The 55-year-old says she will likely continue to ride her bike around Russia for years to come.
First up in the world of business, European stocks rebound as investors dwelled on the European Central Bank's interest rate outlook. After ending with its biggest percentage decline in about 3 weeks on Thursday, the Stoxx Europe 600 rose around 0.5% to 390.9. Vodafone shares jumped over 7% on plans to set up mobile mast operations into 10 European markets. Germany's DAX and France's CAC are both up by almost 0.5%. In Asia, Mumbai's stock market edged lower for a 7th straight session, registering losses in the energy and mining sectors. Japan's Nikkei lost 0.5%, while Shanghai's shares ticked down as well. South Korea's Kospi and Hong Kong's Hang Seng both slipped almost 0.5% as well. Oil prices rose as Brent crude futures were up 23 cents. Seoul says North Korea's economy has shrunk in 2018 for a second straight year, and by the most in 21 years. It said international sanctions and severe drought are forcing economic contraction. South Korea's central bank says Pyongyang's gross domestic product has contracted by 4.1% since last year. It says the country's international trade fell 48.4% in value during 2018. North Korea's agriculture, forestry and fisheries sector too contracted by 1.8%. Well, let's take a look at the weather around the globe. Well, that was all I have from the News Bulletin at the moment, but do stay tuned to Indus News for further updates. And as always, thanks for watching.